Before the world knew her as Whoopi Goldberg, the wise, witty, and fearless voice of truth, she was just Karen Elaine Johnson, a little girl growing up in the rough and crumbling housing projects of New York City. Her story didn't begin in comfort or glamour. It began in the corners of struggle, in the kind of childhood where survival wasn't guaranteed, only earned. Born on November 13, 1955, Karen's earliest memories were shaped not by dreams but by absence. Her father, Robert James Johnson, was a Baptist clergyman who vanished from their lives when she was still small. The void he left behind was filled by her mother, Emma Johnson, a woman who became everything at once: mother, father, protector, and provider. Emma worked day and night, first as a teacher, then as a nurse, sometimes taking extra shifts just to keep food on the table. They lived in Chelsea Elliott houses, a cluster of red brick buildings where life was loud, raw, and unforgiving. Every day was a test of endurance. Money was scarce, safety was uncertain, and children grew up faster than they should have. In that concrete jungle, Karen learned one lesson early. The world didn't owe her kindness. At school, her life was no easier. Teachers called her slow. Classmates laughed when she stumbled over words or forgot simple instructions. They didn't know she had dyslexia, a condition few understood at the time. To them, she was lazy, distracted, maybe even stupid. To her, it felt like being trapped inside her own head, knowing she was smart but unable to prove it. Every wrong answer became a bruise to her confidence. Every insult carved a scar that would take years to fade. She once said in an interview, "When you're a kid and people tell you you're dumb long enough, you start to believe it." And for a while, she did. NBUT Emma Johnson refused to let her daughter drown in those lies. Emma had a kind of quiet strength, the kind that didn't shout but carried authority in every word. She would come home from double shifts, drop her heavy bag, and look her daughter in the eye. "You are not stupid, Karen. You're different, and different is power. You'll see." NTHAT belief became Whoopi's lifeline. It didn't erase the pain, but it gave her a reason to keep going. She clung to humor as a shield, making jokes in class to distract others from her mistakes. The laughter she created became a kind of armor, the first sign of the performer she would one day become. Outside school, reality was harsher. Crime lurked on every corner, addiction ate away at families, and the line between safety and danger was paper thin. But the projects also had their heartbeat. Neighbors who shared what little they had, kids who made playgrounds out of cracked pavements, and music that echoed through open windows on hot summer nights. Those sounds, those faces, those small glimpses of beauty amid chaos, they shaped her worldview. She learned early that humor wasn't just entertainment, it was survival. Still, poverty was relentless. There were nights when dinner was nothing more than bread and hope. Emma kept a straight face, but Karen saw the exhaustion in her mother's eyes. She saw what sacrifice looked like. Hands cracked from endless work, a voice hoarse from overtime, yet a spirit that refused to bend. It was this fire that lit something inside Karen. She began watching people, studying how they moved, talked, and hid their emotions. Even as a child, she had a gift for imitation, a natural performer's instinct to turn observation into expression. But performing wasn't yet her dream, it was her escape. When she wasn't in school or helping her mother, Karen would sneak into the living room, turn on the TV, and watch old black and white films. She was mesmerized by actresses like Lucille Ball, bold, funny, unafraid to look ridiculous. They didn't just make her laugh, they made her believe that being different could be a superpower. Yet the world around her didn't make space for girls like her, dark-skinned, poor, dyslexic, and dreaming. Opportunities weren't handed out in her neighborhood. They had to be stolen from the cracks of possibility. She learned to fight quietly, not with fists, but with defiance. When people said she couldn't, she would nod politely and then try anyway. NBUT, even the strongest spirits can break. In her early teens, life began to press harder. Puberty arrived with confusion, the streets grew meaner, and hope felt like a fading luxury. Karen found herself lost between worlds, too old to be a child, too young to be free. She was hungry for validation, for belonging, for a place that didn't call her less than. And in that hunger, she made mistakes that would haunt her. But at this stage, before the storm of addiction, before fame and heartbreak, she was still just a girl, uncertain, fragile, yet unknowingly destined for greatness. NTHE nickname Whoopi hadn't yet been born, nor the woman the world would one day celebrate. Back then, she was simply Karen, a girl whose laughter hid her loneliness, whose jokes were a cry for connection. In those dimly lit hallways of the projects, she was already rehearsing her survival, learning how to turn pain into performance, how to transform shame into strength. Her childhood was the forge, and every hardship, every insult, every empty night was hammering her into the woman she would become. Looking back, Whoopi once said, "If you ever see me laughing too hard, it's because I've cried too much." That single sentence captures the essence of those years. Laughter as rebellion, humor as armor, and defiance as art. NTHE girl the world called stupid would go on to outthink, outshine, and outlast nearly everyone who doubted her. But in the 1960s, no one could have imagined that the little girl from the projects would one day stand on the Oscar stage, her name echoing through history. NFOR now, she was just a survivor in training, a girl in a cracked mirror, staring at her reflection, whispering the same words her mother had told her. "You're different." And different is power. And in the quiet of that belief, the legend of Whoopi Goldberg began, not in fame or fortune, but in the heart of a young girl who refused to stay broken. By the time Karen Elaine Johnson, the world would later know her as Whoopi Goldberg, stepped into her teenage years, the fragile innocence that once held her together had already begun to crack. The laughter she had used as armor could no longer protect her from what life was preparing to unleash. In the projects of New York, adolescence wasn't about growing up, it was about surviving long enough to see adulthood. The streets whispered temptation, a dangerous kind that promised escape but often delivered ruin. For a girl who had always felt misunderstood and invisible, that whisper was seductive. At 14, Karen's world shifted in a way that would scar her forever. She became pregnant, too young to understand love, too vulnerable to protect herself, and too afraid to ask for help. In a neighborhood where shame spread faster than compassion, rumors tore through her small world like wildfire. Overnight, she wasn't just the girl who couldn't read fast enough. She was now that girl. NHER mother Emma faced it with quiet devastation. She had always carried herself with grace, but this broke something inside her. Still, she didn't shout. She didn't abandon. She simply held her daughter tighter, as if holding on could stop the world from judging her. The pregnancy was unsafe. The child didn't survive. Karen nearly didn't either. The trauma carved itself deep, a wound she would carry in silence for decades. NBUT, even after loss, life didn't pause to let her grieve. The world moved on, indifferent to her pain. By 15, she faced another agonizing decision when New York legalized abortion. It was the only way to take control of a life that seemed constantly slipping away. She later admitted that the experience changed her forever. Not just her body, but her soul. It taught her the cost of choice, the complexity of freedom, and the cruelty of judgment. It was this experience that later made her one of the loudest voices for women's rights in Hollywood. But back then, it wasn't about politics. It was survival. And after dropping out of school at 16, Karen drifted. She was a young woman without a compass, caught in the dangerous rhythm of city life. Every day blurred into the next, loud music, cheap drinks, and faces that came and went like passing shadows. The laughter she once used to comfort others had turned hollow. She began experimenting with drugs. First out of curiosity, then out of desperation. It started with LSD, a psychedelic escape from a reality too heavy to carry. The colors, the hallucinations, the fleeting sense of weightlessness, it gave her a temporary version of peace. But LSD was only the beginning. The streets had darker offerings, and soon heroin entered her life. It promised numbness, a reprieve from grief, loneliness, and shame. Heroin doesn't ask for much in the beginning. It just wants your trust. It comes like a friend, quiet, comforting, and then slowly steals everything you love. Within months, Karen was no longer in control. She was chasing a high that never lasted, trapped in a cycle that blurred day into night. NHER mother, exhausted but desperate, tried everything, pleading, crying, praying. But addiction is a thief that doesn't listen to tears. Karen would disappear for days, lost in New York's underbelly, surrounded by others trying to escape their own ghosts. She met people who never made it out, bright souls dimmed by needles and empty promises. There were nights she didn't think she'd live to see morning. Nights where she lay on the cold floor of a stranger's apartment, the city humming outside, her mind begging for silence. But somewhere beneath the chaos there was a spark, a stubborn will that refused to die. "I always had this voice in my head," she would later say. It would whisper, "You're not done yet. Not yet." NTHAT voice. That whisper saved her. At 18, she decided she'd had enough. With trembling hands and a heart full of fear, she checked herself into a rehabilitation program. It wasn't easy. Recovery rarely is. She would sweat, shake, and scream through nights of withdrawal, her body begging for what her soul was trying to forget. But this time she didn't run. She stayed. And there, in that fragile rebirth, she met Alvin Martin, a counselor who saw not a broken girl but a survivor. He didn't judge her, he didn't pity her, he believed in her, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Their connection grew from compassion into love, and by 19, they were married. For the first time, Karen felt the kind of peace that wasn't chemical. And soon after, she gave birth to her daughter, Alex Martin, and with that, her purpose changed. Motherhood didn't erase her pain, but it gave it meaning. Every sleepless night, every tear, every moment of fear became fuel. She wanted her daughter to have the stability she never did. NBUT marriage wasn't easy. Alvin was kind, but their love was built in the ruins of her recovery, fragile, uneven, and strained by the weight of poverty. They were young, broke, and trying to heal from wounds too deep for time alone to fix. By the time Karen was 23, the marriage collapsed. She found herself alone again, a single mother with no degree, no job, and a baby to feed. NBUT, unlike before, she wasn't lost. This time, she had a reason to fight. She took on every job she could find: waitress, bricklayer, funeral assistant, anything that could pay the rent and put food on the table. Life was exhausting, but in that exhaustion, something remarkable began to take root: resilience. Each day she survived was a victory. Each smile from her daughter was a reminder that even broken women can rebuild. She learned that survival wasn't just about living through pain. It was about turning that pain into fuel. Years later, when Whoopi looked back on her darkest years, she didn't hide them. She spoke about them openly, about addiction, about abortion, about the mistakes that nearly killed her. "I'm not ashamed," she once said, "because everything I went through taught me who I am. And I like who I am." N.T. Ho's words, simple yet profound, became her anthem. The girl who once needed heroin to feel alive now had purpose pulsing through every vein. She had traded her addiction for ambition, her pain for performance. NBUT, the road ahead was still long. Her journey from that broken teenager in New York to the woman who would one day command stages and movie screens across the world was just beginning. Before fame, before the Oscars, before the world knew her as Whoopi, there was a girl who fell into darkness and somehow, against all odds, crawled back into the light. Darkness didn't defeat her, it defined her. It became the shadow that made her light burn brighter. Because sometimes you have to break completely before you can build yourself into something unshakable. And for Karen Elaine Johnson, that breaking point became the birthplace of Whoopi Goldberg, the woman who would one day turn every scar into a story, every failure into fire. By the mid-1970s, Whoopi Goldberg's life had become a quiet battle between survival and self-worth. The teenage chaos had burned itself out, leaving behind a woman in search of something more than just a roof or a fix. She was searching for meaning. The streets had taught her how to fight, but not how to live. She was in her early 20s, with a child to feed and a life that refused to cooperate. NSHE found herself drifting across New York, cleaning houses, waiting tables, even working as a bricklayer for a while. It was humble, back-breaking work, the kind that leaves your hands cracked and your pride wounded. But each job carried a strange sense of discipline. It gave her time to think. And when she thought, she remembered what had once made her feel alive: the stage. As a child, Whoopi had been captivated by the power of performance. Not just acting, but transformation. The way a person could become someone else for a few fleeting minutes and make the world listen. She had done small bits in community theater before, but now that dream seemed distant. The world didn't have a place for a poor black woman with dyslexia and a history of addiction, or so she thought. And everything changed when she made her way to California. The move wasn't glamorous. She didn't head west chasing fame or a Hollywood fantasy. She was running from stagnation, from the heavy air of her past. San Diego offered her something New York hadn't: anonymity. A chance to start over, quietly, without everyone knowing her name or her mistakes. There, she joined a small theater collective, the Blake Street Hawkeyes in Berkeley. It wasn't Broadway, but it was something pure. The audience was raw, the performers were hungry, and the energy was electric. For the first time, Whoopi began to find herself again, not through imitation, but through honesty. She started creating characters drawn from the people she knew, the outcasts, the broken souls, the ones who never got to speak. NBUT. Even as she began to build this new world, the shadows of the old one followed her. One afternoon, she boarded a plane to Los Angeles, determined to attend an audition that could change her life. She was nervous but excited until the unthinkable happened. Mid-flight, the plane suddenly dipped and shook. Passengers screamed. Oxygen masks fell from above. It was chaos, pure terror in the air. NTHE plane didn't crash, not fully. It managed to stabilize and land safely, but that brief, violent brush with death left Whoopi scarred for life. From that day on, she developed a crippling fear of flying, one that would follow her throughout her career. But it also planted something else in her, a deeper awareness of mortality. She began to understand how fragile it all was, how easily everything could end in a single heartbeat. NTHAT experience bled into her art. Her performances became sharper, more authentic. She was no longer pretending to feel pain or fear. She was reliving it. And in that raw truth, audiences found something magnetic. And then came the one-woman show that changed everything. She wrote and performed The Spook Show, a series of monologues featuring eccentric, deeply human characters. A little girl obsessed with being white, a junkie. A woman with a disability. Each story was crafted with empathy and razor-sharp wit. It was funny, heartbreaking, and brutally real. And word spread quickly. Soon, small audiences turned into packed houses. People weren't just laughing. They were crying, applauding, and seeing themselves reflected in her words. She wasn't just performing. She was channeling voices that the world had ignored. And then, fate intervened in the form of a Hollywood legend. Mike Nichols, one of the most respected directors in American theater and film, happened to see her performance. He was captivated. Nichols had an instinct for raw, original talent, and Whoopi's performance struck him as something extraordinary. He immediately decided to help her bring her show to Broadway. NTHAT leap from the small, smoky rooms of Berkeley to the bright lights of Broadway was nothing short of revolutionary. The Spook Show became Whoopi Goldberg, direct from Broadway. Audiences were stunned by the force of her storytelling, her uncanny ability to make them laugh 1 second and fall silent the next. And among those audiences was one woman whose life and film would change Whoopi's forever: Alice Walker. Walker had written The Color Purple, a powerful story about Black womanhood, trauma, and redemption. When she saw Whoopi's performance, she knew immediately this was Celie. The role wasn't just about acting. It was about living the truth of a woman beaten by life yet never broken. When Steven Spielberg began casting for the film adaptation of The Color Purple, Walker insisted he meet Whoopi. At first, Spielberg was unsure. Whoopi wasn't a Hollywood name, and the film was a high-stakes production. But when she auditioned, something extraordinary happened. The room went silent. She didn't just read lines, she became Celie, fragile yet fierce, weary yet resilient. Spielberg later admitted he was moved to tears. She got the role on the spot. When The Color Purple was released in 1985, the world met Whoopi Goldberg for the first time, but not the way the industry expected. She wasn't glamorous, she wasn't polished, she was real. Her performance was a revelation, shattering stereotypes of what a leading woman could look like or sound like. And critics hailed her as a genius. The performance earned her an Academy Award nomination for Best Actress, a monumental achievement for a woman who had once been called slow, who had swept floors to survive, who had once believed her life had no future. NBUT, the success wasn't just about fame. It was redemption. Standing on the world's biggest stage, Whoopi carried every piece of her past with her, the dyslexia, the addiction, the fear, the poverty, and turned it into power. Still, the irony of success wasn't lost on her. Hollywood now celebrated her for the same authenticity it had once ignored. The same darkness that nearly destroyed her had become her greatest strength. Whoopi had found her voice, and the world was finally listening. NBUT behind the applause. Fame brought a new challenge. With recognition came scrutiny. With love came loneliness. And with every step forward, the ghosts of her past waited in the wings. Because in Hollywood, every rise has its cost. And for Whoopi, that bill was about to come due. When The Color Purple catapulted Whoopi Goldberg into the Hollywood stratosphere, it seemed like a fairy tale finally fulfilled. A woman who had once scrubbed floors and slept in shelters now graced red carpets and Oscar stages. The world saw a new star, a fresh, bold voice who didn't fit the Hollywood mold. But what the world didn't see was the isolation that came with it, the quiet ache behind the applause. In the years following her breakout role, Whoopi's life became a whirlwind of interviews, magazine covers, and phone calls from agents who had once ignored her. For the first time, the doors that had always been closed to her were flung wide open. Scripts poured in, some brilliant, some predictable. Hollywood wanted to use her, but it wasn't sure how. NSHE wasn't the conventional beauty studios like to market. She didn't smile on command or wear the designer gowns expected of a new starlet. She was blunt, funny, and fearless. A woman who spoke like she meant it. And while that authenticity made audiences love her, it made the industry uneasy. Whoopi wasn't playing by the rules. Still, she carved her own path. In 1990, she starred in Ghost, opposite Patrick Swayze and Demi Moore. It was supposed to be a romantic drama, but Whoopi's performance as Oda Mae Brown, the loud, lovable psychic who helps a ghost communicate with his grieving lover, stole the show. Her energy was electric, her timing perfect, and audiences couldn't get enough. For the first time, Hollywood couldn't look away. The Academy came calling again, and this time, she won. When Whoopi Goldberg accepted her Oscar for Best Supporting Actress in 1991, she made history as the second black woman ever to win an Academy Award for acting. And standing on that stage, golden statue in hand, Whoopi didn't just smile. She glowed. She had fought her way into a world that had never made room for her and conquered it on her own terms. NBUT. Even in triumph, she felt the ache of something missing. The more successful she became, the lonelier it got. Fame had its own kind of silence, one filled not with laughter, but with echoes of what once was. NSHE had been in love before, but success changed things. relationships became complicated. People began seeing the fame, not the woman. Every friendship was filtered through suspicion. Every word she said was quoted, twisted, or analyzed. And then came Sister Act, the movie that made her a global icon. Released in 1992, it was a quirky comedy about a lounge singer hiding in a convent. Whoopi's charm lit up every frame. She was funny, warm, commanding, and audiences adored her. The film became a box office smash, followed by an equally successful sequel. Suddenly, Whoopi wasn't just a respected actress. She was a household name. NBUT success had its shadow side. Hollywood, in its usual fashion, began to pigeonhole her, expecting her to play the same funny black woman again and again. She fought against it, choosing roles that challenged her or showcased her depth. Yet no matter how many awards she won or shows she hosted, the whispers followed. She's loud. She's difficult. She's too much. And in reality, she was just tired. Fame had a way of draining people, taking their stories, their time, their quiet moments, until all that was left was performance. Whoopi was constantly in motion, constantly expected to deliver laughter. But behind the scenes, she was losing pieces of herself. There were nights she would come home from sets to a silent house. No applause, no cameras, just her and her thoughts. Sometimes she'd stay up late, smoking, reflecting on how strange it all was, to be loved by millions but truly known by none. NHER humor became her armor. On talk shows, she was quick, witty, the perfect guest. But behind those laughs, there was fatigue. In one interview, she once admitted, "I'm not sure people love me. They love what I do." It was a rare moment of vulnerability from a woman the world thought was unbreakable. As the 1990s rolled on, she diversified her career, producing, hosting, lending her voice to films like The Lion King and joining Star Trek: The Next Generation. She even became a regular on Comic Relief, using comedy to raise millions for the homeless. But no matter how high she climbed, she couldn't escape the emotional distance that fame had built around her. NSHE tried to fill that void through connection. She married again, tried to love again, but the spotlight was never gentle on intimacy. It magnified flaws, exaggerated conflicts, and turned private heartbreaks into public spectacle. When people think of Whoopi Goldberg, they often remember the laughter. But laughter was only part of her survival. The other part was solitude. She began to understand that while applause might feed the ego, it rarely feeds the soul. NHER success had also made her a symbol, something larger than life. To many, she represented strength, defiance, and possibility. But even symbols get tired. She once said, half-jokingly, that she didn't need another man or marriage, that she was happiest being alone. Beneath that joke was truth. Because solitude, for Whoopi, wasn't loneliness. It was peace. After years of chaos, addiction, and survival, she had learned to find comfort in her own company. She had become her own sanctuary. NBUT Hollywood, ever hungry for headlines, wasn't done with her. The next phase of her life would test her like never before. Scandals that threatened her reputation, heartbreaks that nearly broke her spirit, and losses that would cut deeper than any review or rumor. NTHE laughter that had built her empire was about to collide with the pain that once defined her. Because no matter how high she climbed, the world never stopped watching. And when the world watches too closely, even the strongest start to crack. And for Whoopi Goldberg, the cracks were about to show. By the mid-1990s, Whoopi Goldberg had climbed to a summit few ever reached. An Oscar-winning actress, a box office draw, a beloved comedian, and a pioneer for women of color in Hollywood. But success, as she would soon learn, doesn't shield anyone from heartbreak or humiliation. The higher she rose, the sharper the world's knives became. NHER personal life was a storm the tabloids couldn't resist. Whoopi had already weathered 2 failed marriages. The first to Alvin Martin, born more from necessity than love. He had helped her escape addiction, given her a sense of stability, and fathered her only child, Alex. But Whoopi knew early on that she wasn't built for the mold of a traditional wife. "I wanted to feel safe, not owned," she once said. When the marriage dissolved, she was left alone with a baby and a world that didn't care about single mothers, especially not black women trying to break into entertainment. NSHE pushed forward, carving out a life for herself and her daughter through sheer grit. Alex grew up watching her mother fight poverty, rejection, stereotypes, and later fame itself. But motherhood came with its own trials. When Alex became a teenage mother, history seemed to repeat itself. For Whoopi, it was a haunting déjà vu, the same cycle of struggle, only this time she was on the other side. Instead of hiding her family's story, she made it her mission to speak about it. She became an outspoken advocate for women's rights and single mothers, saying, "No woman should ever feel ashamed for surviving." Then came the second marriage to Dutch cinematographer David Claassen in 1986. He was creative, gentle, and shared her artistic soul, but their connection burned out quickly. He loved the idea of Whoopi Goldberg. She would later say, "Not the woman I actually am." Their marriage lasted barely 2 years. NHER's third and final marriage to actor Lyle Trachtenberg in 1994 was the shortest of all, less than a year. After it ended, Whoopi realized something profound. She wasn't meant to be married. "I'm just not cut out for it," she told interviewers bluntly. "Some people are built for companionship. I'm built for freedom." It was a statement few women in Hollywood had the courage to make at the time. While others sought fairy tale endings, Whoopi sought peace and solitude. Yet even as she swore off marriage, she still believed in love. NTHAT belief would lead her into one of the most scandalous and painful chapters of her life. In 1992, while filming Made in America, Whoopi met Ted Danson, the charming blue-eyed actor beloved for his role in Cheers. Their chemistry was instant, undeniable, and explosive. Danson was married at the time, and Hollywood's golden boy found himself drawn to Whoopi in a way no one expected. Their relationship quickly became public and controversial. NFOR Whoopi. It was more than a love affair. It was a connection built on wit, laughter, and shared defiance of Hollywood's expectations. But the world wasn't kind. The interracial relationship drew vicious backlash, much of it racially charged. When Ted Danson infamously appeared in blackface during a Friars Club roast meant to honor Whoopi, the outrage was volcanic. The press crucified him, and her NTHE incident, intended as satire, became a cultural scandal that nearly destroyed Danson's career and deeply wounded Whoopi's. She tried to defend the performance, saying it was meant to expose hypocrisy, but the damage was done. Overnight, the woman America had loved to laugh with became a lightning rod for outrage. It was a painful lesson in how quickly public affection can turn to condemnation. "They loved me when I made them laugh," she said years later. "But the minute I made them uncomfortable, they wanted me gone." NTHE relationship didn't survive the storm. After the breakup, Whoopi retreated from the public eye for a time. The laughter faded, replaced by exhaustion. She had lost not just a partner, but the illusion that fame could protect her from the world's cruelty. NTHE years that followed were quieter, introspective. She worked steadily, acting, producing, and lending her voice to animated classics, but she also carried invisible wounds. Fame, she realized, had a way of magnifying every heartbreak. "People don't just watch you fall," she once said. "They film it, comment on it, and sell tickets to it." As her career matured, Whoopi began focusing on using her platform to speak truth, even when it came with a cost. She hosted award shows, took on political issues, and became an outspoken advocate for racial and gender equality. But behind the bravado, she was grieving, not for lost fame or love, but for the family she would soon lose. In 2010, her mother Emma passed away. Emma had been more than a parent. She was Whoopi's compass, her protector, the only person who had believed in her before the world did. Losing her was like losing the ground beneath her feet. Whoopi later admitted that she never truly recovered. "My mother was my home," she said quietly. "When she died, I became homeless in a way that no house can fix." NHER grief was private at first, but grief has a way of showing itself. In her slower pace, her gentler tone, the rare moments she fell silent on camera. Then, in 2015, another blow struck. Her brother Clyde, her last remaining link to her childhood, died suddenly. It was as if the universe had stripped her bare, piece by piece. No husband, no parents, no siblings, only the echoes of laughter and memories of the projects in Chelsea where it all began. NBUT and loss, Whoopi found her deepest truth. Love doesn't disappear when the people we love do. It transforms. It becomes purpose. NSHE poured her energy into causes that mattered to her: women's healthcare, education, and compassion for the marginalized. Her comedy became softer, her wisdom sharper. Where once she performed to be seen, now she spoke to make others feel seen. Even when controversy followed, as it often did, especially after joining The View, she no longer sought approval. She understood that truth-tellers rarely get applause. They get scars. But scars, she had learned, were proof that you've healed. In her 60s, Whoopi had stopped chasing the things that once defined her. She no longer sought love in others. She had made peace with herself. "I don't want to live in anyone's house but my own," she said. "I'm not lonely. I'm free." NHER laughter, once her defense, became her offering. Her tears, once hidden, became her message. Because through every heartbreak and scandal, every loss and recovery, she had transformed pain into empathy, and empathy into art. And though the world remembered her for the gold statues, the glittering roles, and the fiery talk show moments, her truest legacy wasn't built in the spotlight. It was built in the quiet, in the spaces where she chose to forgive, to keep going, and to keep laughing, even when laughter was the hardest thing to find. As the cameras faded and the headlines moved on, Whoopi Goldberg stood as something rarer than a star. She stood as a survivor, one who had faced humiliation and heartbreak, yet refused to bow. One who lost her mother, her brother, and the love of her life, yet still showed up to make others smile. Because for Whoopi, survival wasn't about avoiding pain, it was about transforming it. Every scandal became a lesson. Every heartbreak became a story. Every loss became a reason to keep living with heart, humor, and grace. NSHE didn't just survive Hollywood. She humanized it. And in doing so, she became more than a celebrity. She became a mirror, reflecting the beauty, fragility, and strength that lives within every person who's ever been broken, and dared to rebuild themselves anyway. By the time Whoopi Goldberg reached her late 60s, the spotlight had softened. The laughter that once echoed through packed theaters had grown quieter, replaced by something deeper, a calm wisdom earned through years of survival. Her story had already become legend, a girl from New York's housing projects who climbed to the pinnacle of Hollywood, who lost nearly everything and still refused to stop showing up. But this final chapter of her life would not be about fame. It would be about gratitude and what it means to truly live after almost dying. In early 2018, Whoopi Goldberg vanished from television. Viewers of The View noticed her empty chair, her absence unexplained. Rumors began to spread. Was she sick, retired, or simply done with the chaos of live TV? The truth, as it turned out, was far more terrifying. Whoopi had fallen gravely ill with pneumonia and sepsis, two infections that together almost claimed her life. The illness struck suddenly, turning what seemed like a normal flu into a nightmare. She was hospitalized, her body shutting down, her lungs filling with fluid. Doctors told her she had only a 30% chance of survival. For days, she drifted between consciousness and the edge of death. "I came very close to leaving this earth," she later revealed, her voice quieter than usual. "I had pneumonia in both lungs. There was a point where they said, 'You're not going to make it.'" NTHE woman who had spent her entire life fighting suddenly faced a battle she couldn't control. Fame, money, awards. None of it mattered in that hospital bed. All that mattered was breath. Every inhale became a prayer. Every exhale, a fragile victory. NBUT, she survived. Barely, and when she returned, she was not the same. She walked slower, spoke softer, and smiled with a kind of serenity that only those who've glimpsed death can carry. "When you almost die," she said, "you start to see how beautiful being alive really is." NHER near-death experience stripped away everything unnecessary. She no longer chased roles, headlines, or validation. Instead, she focused on living with purpose, on using her voice not just to entertain, but to heal. When she returned to The View, audiences could see the change. There was still fire in her opinions, but now it came with grace. She didn't argue to win. She spoke to understand. She had learned that peace, not perfection, was her greatest achievement. NHER health scare also deepened her compassion. She became more outspoken about the importance of self-care, especially for women who spend their lives taking care of everyone else. She reminded viewers, "You can't pour from an empty cup. You matter too." In her later years, Whoopi began to reflect more openly on her legacy. She never saw herself as a trailblazer, though history certainly does. She is one of the few artists in existence to hold the prestigious EGOT, an Emmy, Grammy, Oscar, and Tony Award. But to her, those trophies were symbols, not success. "I didn't do this to be famous," she once said. "I did it because I love telling stories that make people feel less alone." NTHAT, perhaps, was the secret thread running through her entire life: connection. Whether through comedy, drama, or honest conversation, Whoopi Goldberg made people feel seen. She gave a voice to the misunderstood, the overlooked, and the imperfect. NHER resilience became her crown. She had endured poverty, addiction, scandal, heartbreak, and death, yet somehow emerged with her humor intact. Her laughter no longer sounded like defiance. It sounded like freedom, and she used that freedom generously. She mentored young comedians, supported up-and-coming directors, and became an advocate for the next generation of storytellers, especially women of color, who saw in her a reflection of what was possible. NSHE also embraced her age with confidence. In a culture obsessed with youth, Whoopi never tried to hide her years. She wore them like badges of honor. Her dreadlocks turned silver, her voice deepened, and she continued showing up, not as the glamorous actress of the past, but as the wise matriarch who had seen it all and still found reasons to laugh. NHER legacy, she understood, wasn't built on perfection. It was built on honesty. She had made mistakes, spoken out of turn, loved the wrong people, and taken the wrong roles. But she had also apologized, learned, and evolved, publicly and unapologetically. That was her real strength. In interviews, she often returned to one recurring truth. She never wanted to be anyone but herself. "You spend your early years trying to fit in," she said. "Then you get older and realize the best thing you ever did was not fit in at all." NTHAT defiant self-acceptance became her message to the world, especially to those who felt unseen or unwanted. She reminded them that greatness doesn't require perfection, just perseverance. Today, when she walks onto the set of The View or steps onto a stage, there's a gravity to her presence, the kind that comes from having faced every kind of loss and still choosing laughter. Her eyes carry both mischief and melancholy, her words both humor and history. And though she's surrounded by applause, Whoopi Goldberg doesn't perform for it anymore. She performs because she can, because she's alive, because every breath is a victory song. In one of her most reflective moments, she summed up her journey with piercing simplicity. "I've lived through the fire, and I came out still laughing." That's my success story, NHER story, from the projects to the Oscars, from addiction to survival, from scandal to serenity, is proof that resilience is not just about surviving pain, but transforming it into power. At 69, Whoopi Goldberg stands not as a flawless legend, but as something far more important. A reminder that broken things can still shine, that scars can still be beautiful, that laughter, even after loss, can still sound like healing. NSHE doesn't need the world's validation anymore. She's already won the only crown that matters, the survivor's crown, and in that, her story becomes more than entertainment. It becomes a testament to endurance, to truth, and to the unshakable belief that even when the world tries to silence you, your voice can still echo across generations. Because Whoopi Goldberg didn't just make people laugh, NSHE made them believe that survival itself is an art.